I think we are now entering into a new phase of Malaysian history. If we look back, there were several periods in our political history. From 1957 to around 1969, we would probably call it the first phase. The first phase had a political order led by UMNO together with MCA and MIC. So that was the first phase. The first phase, the first political order collapsed at May 13th. It collapses for several reasons. One is, of course, the riots. But you look back also because the then government was pursuing a laissez-faire economic policy with very limited government intervention. However, demographic has had a say, in the sense that after the war, many people make many babies. So there was baby boomer. The baby boomers become 20 years old, 25 years old by around mid-60s, late 60s, without jobs. And that caused the rupture in 1969. You had the 1969 election, you had the ruling party losing Malay youth support, losing non-Malay youth support. Of course, it ended tragically. The second political order, we would probably say, started with new economic policy, started with Razak taking over, probably stretching almost up to 1990 election. So there was a period of time, about 20 years, where the government heavily intervened in the economy, but in the favor of poor Malays, younger Malays. So there was a generation of younger Malays who actually left the villages and become urbanized and became middle class within 10, 15 years. So that was a period, and that was the foundation of UMNO. If you look back, the foundation of UMNO was actually from the new economic policy, but of course there were also many non-Malay youth who were disenchanted. So that was the period from around 1970 to 1990. The 1990 general election was quite pivotal. 1990 general election resulted in a situation where the Barisan Nasional ruling party still won, but the threat of a potential alternative coalition, at that time it was led by Tunku Razaleigh, was keenly felt. And the then government decided to switch gear. And Mahathir, the then Prime Minister, gave a very important speech in February 1991, which outlined the Vision 2020, as well as this idea of Bangsa Malaysia. From around 1991 to 2005, when Hishamuddin waved the crease, there was a period of time of about 14 years where Malaysia had political peace, and also this idea that politics was not so racial. So there was a period of time where there was very, very little racial sentiment for around 14 years, and there was half of which also saw the economic takeoff around the time. From 2005 to 2022, there was a 17-year period in which UMNO was losing support from among non-Malays and also from among Malays. Yet, from our side, we were trying to win power on our own, and we were not able to win power on our own. So, from the Pakatan Harapan side, we fought Barisan Nasional in 2008, 2013, 2018, and 2022. After 4 general elections, UMNO declined, but at the same time, UMNO still has strength. Yet, on our side, we were trying to win on our own. We failed to win on our own. So we came to November 2022, where a unity government was formed. Moving forward, this, of course, there is a potential that all this can unravel. There's a potential that all this can unravel, but by now, I would say that we are looking into a rather stable period, at least until the end of this term. I mean, we have been tested. We have been tested in the state elections. We have been tested in parliament. We have been tested in the by-elections. I would say that this government is now entering into a period which will be relatively stable until the end of the term. And we will also see a situation where we will have to accept that. We will have to accept that. Yeah, we'll have to accept that the four northern states will be dominated by PAS, and the idea of Perikatan Nasional will peak. The idea of Perikatan Nasional as a national coalition has probably peaked during the state election, and it is now a situation where PAS will dominate the four states, and Bersatu probably will see itself diminishing. So I think this is the contour of a political situation. So we have an opportunity to enter a new political order if we do well. The second part, briefly, is on the potential for a second economic takeoff. Between 1988 and 1995, and of course, during your days, during the Hopping Horse days, there was a period of time that Malaysia really had an economic takeoff. The economy grew by around 9% annually from 1988 to 1997. Wages grew by 9% almost every year for a period of about 9 years, from 88 to 97. That means the size of GDP expanded. At the same time, it expanded in tandem with wages for an extended period of time. So that was a period where Malaysia really grew and doubled its size of GDP within less than 10 years. Subsequently, we faced three major challenges. In 1997, there was the Asian economic crisis or Asian financial crisis. In 1998, Anwar was sacked, and that was 25 years ago, September 1998. And that triggered a series of political challenges for years. And actually not talk about a lot, but very important. In 2001, China joined WTO. When China joined WTO, most of the world's manufacturing investment went into China and did not come to this region. So over the last 25 years, the Malaysian economy were neither here nor there because of these three factors, not mutually exclusive. But now things have changed. Things have changed. Number one, there is diversion away from China. Because of geopolitical challenges, companies are de-risking. And when they de-risk, they have the following choices. Number one, home shoring in United States or in the Europe. Number two, near shoring. For instance, if you're a US firm, you set up shops in Mexico, which is happening in a massive manner, or set up shops in Poland or some other Eastern European countries. The third one is friend shoring, setting up shops in allies, country. For instance, fabs in South Korea or in Japan, which is happening. Semiconductor fabs in Japan. Or India, for that matter. But some of those diversion will come to Southeast Asia. When it comes to Southeast Asia, and this is Malaysia's opportunity, as long as Malaysia can position itself as an indispensable middle in Southeast Asia, that means we are not as sophisticated as Singapore, we admit that, but we are also not we are also not Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, or Thailand. They have demographic dividend. They have a huge reservoir of labor, which we do not have. But we have a very skilled labor force. As long as you pay adequately, you can access to all sorts of talents, and we have an broadly English educated workforce, English common law, and a very strategic location with good ports and other logistical infrastructure. So this is where Malaysia should occupy. If we can do all this correctly, plus if we can do green transition in a way that is massive and rapid, and we can green up the economy very quickly, that will add to the opportunity. And thirdly, if we can tech up, I call this tech up, I use the word tech up to mean automation, digitalization, adoption of technology in a broad way, and innovation. If we can also do tech up, that means our economy no longer rely on input of labor alone, but actually rely on a lot more technologies across the board. that will be the key engines for Malaysian economy to move upward. Finally, why do we want to see all this? Why do we want to see a new political order? Why do we want to see a second economic takeoff? Because we want to create a better society. We think that Malaysia has huge potential. We think that Malaysia can grow, and Malaysia can create a middle class society. We think that this country can be a situation where at least 60-70% of Malaysians are earning enough eligible to pay income tax. See, one of these debates that is constantly in the public sphere is, oh, we must have GST because too few people pay income tax. But most people forgetting that why most Malaysians do not pay income tax, because they don't earn enough to be eligible to pay income tax. So the real problem is to create better pay, better jobs, more fulfilling jobs, so that more Malaysians are in a middle income situation, and that will be the way forward. So what we want to do, all this hopefully within the period of 10 years. Hopefully we have that political space and time to do all this over the next 10 years. Thank you very much.
And how and why you got into politics?
First of all, I must clarify, I have no law degree, so I'm not interviewing for any job in this firm. I came from humble beginning in KL. I was born in KL but raised in Subang Jaya. I went to Chinese primary school in Petaling Jaya, and then I went to a Chinese secondary school in Klang. I didn't speak a word of English until 18 years old, and I went through, so I am both Chinese educated and English educated in that sense. I believe that Malaysia has great potential, but Malaysia needs to create a society where people with my background will have opportunity. I sold lottery ticket on the streets when I was 12 years old. And interestingly, when I was 14 years old, I was working as a waiter in Subang Parade. Now,
Section 15.
Yeah, Subang Parade, Section 15. There's some relevance to what I want to address. In 1991, when I was 14 years old, I was paid 2 ringgit 50 cents an hour as a waiter. A year later, because of a very tight labor market at that time, as we mentioned earlier, 1988 onwards, there was a second there was a first economic takeoff. Things were doing really well. A year later, with a bit of experience at 15 years old, I was paid 4 ringgit 50 cents an hour. Today, you go to all the big fast food chain, workers are paid around 8 ringgit an hour. After 30 years. These are adult workers. They're only paid about 8 ringgit an hour. So wages has lagged so far behind inflation, and we need a round of adjustment. We need to rethink. So anyway, this is a digression.
No. Okay. I mean, to be a doctor, you have to go through 7 years of schooling in a medical school. To be a lawyer and engineer, you could go to get a degree. But to be a politician, you don't need any qualification. And then we have a recent MP from Langkawi who says that, ask your transport minister whether there will be a railway line from Alostar to Kua, which is over 50 or 60 kilometers of water. So, is there any plan or proposal where at least the politician to be qualified as a candidate to have a degree in PPE or in political science and governance, something of that nature?
You see, once you have this sort of arrangement, lawyers like Dato' Chee will not be able to be a politician. And we actually, if you look into history, our own history and US history, as well as UK history, the biggest number of politicians belongs to the legal fraternity. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. US, UK, and even Malaysia.
US, yeah.
You look at the credential of any of this country that I mentioned. the most number of politicians had a background as a lawyer. So part of the problem is because you are not a politician, so that we have lousy politicians. But to be serious, I think the assembly or the parliament chamber is often, whether in US, UK or any other chamber, the chamber is often a theatre. Okay, I mean, you cannot deny that the chamber is often a theatre or has some theatrical element. But what is important is that we have yet to develop a comprehensive and powerful committee system. Okay, that is something that we need to do. We have not been able to do it very well, but there is a start. So this government this current parliament has 10 committees. If you look at the US political system, you go to the chamber is noisy. Of course, sometimes not as crazy as ours, but sometimes actually not quite parallel also. But the committee system is very powerful. Their committee system is very powerful. The committee chair in the US Senate, and even nowadays in some of the UK committees, if the chair is very competent, they can actually go into very important policy area, call upon experts to give evidence, and build as much as possible bipartisanship in the committee. Usually in parliamentary committees, even you come from different parties, because you're dealing with common issues, and because you're in a committee rather than in an adversarial chamber, you're likely to reach consensus than otherwise. So what Malaysia needs to do is really to build a very strong parliamentary committee system. And in a committee system, you also build long-term understanding of issues. For instance, if you are in the defense committee, you will build long-term relationship with defense personnel. You will build long-term relationship with defense civilian, even with people who are supplying to defense. And you will, at least those who are hardworking enough, will find ways to understand the issues in a deeper manner. This is what we do not have yet. And this is something that we should work on. So, to answer your questions about whether there should be a credential for any politician.
Minimum qualification.
Minimum qualification, I think, depends on the parties. The DAP is almost like most of them are graduates. But I would not say that you have to specify someone that has a certain degree, because politics is about representation. It is not wrong to have an engineer to be a politician. It's not wrong to have a doctor to be a politician. Some are good doctors, some are bad doctors. Sometimes the doctors are good, sometimes the doctors are bad. And if you have a 70-year career, sometimes that doctor was good, sometimes that doctor was bad.
The MP of Kuala Town, what degree does he have this day? MP for Kuala Town? The MP?
The one
I
am not very sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but anyway, sometimes it also depends on party. Most people don't like party politics. Okay? Most people who are not part of a political party do not like party politics because they think that party politics involve too much of supper with your members, the time out campaigning, party politics. But so far, if you look at all the democracies that we have, that we can look at, the United States, France, UK, Australia, even Indonesia, political party is still an important institution. That we want to have better political parties. We want to have political parties which are able to churn out talent. We want political party to have structure, not to finish off young people, but actually give young people a chance, give women a chance. Because that structure is still important. The pipeline of political talent is very much coming from the political process of political parties. And we need to have better political parties. We need to scrutinize how we can strengthen the political party system so that these parties compete on offering talents. These parties compete on offering better people, and this party filter out people who have no integrity, people who have who are lousy. But this is an aspect where in which we will need time to develop as a new democracy. I would say that Malaysia is a new democracy. We are trying to democratize, but to democratize, you need strong parliamentary committees so that these people go through hours and hours of debates away from what they call cameras, away from the theatre, that is the chamber, and also you need strong political parties to be the pipeline.
Why is Penang so successful, and what can Malacca learn from Penang?
Penang was successful because it was a pioneer when it comes to export-led industrialization. Malaysia was pursuing import substitution strategy in the 1960s, but from 1970 onwards, because of the high unemployment that I spoke about earlier, particularly in urban areas like Penang, where at one point in 1970 the unemployment rate was 17%. So the then new government, the Chong Yu government, decided to switch gear and to promote export-led industrialization. And that also coincided with the expansion and outsourcing of US E&E company like Intel. Penang was the first overseas factory that Intel ever invested. So there is a book called Chip War, which I encourage you to take a look. This is the #1 bestseller in this year, that talks about the overall global semiconductor battles. And the origins of semiconductor, of course, is in California, but Penang and Singapore were one of the earlier destinations. So that's the first part. The second part is, because they have been there for so long, there are many people who graduate from the companies, in the sense that they either leave the company or they retired, and they started a supply chain that supplies to these multinationals. So there are many Penangites who previously worked in Intel and other companies. They set up what they call the companies to provide and service this multinational. So they built a very strong supply chain locally. Thirdly, through these experiences, they built strong engineering capability, that particularly in precision tooling, that is not just for semiconductor, but also now developed into branching out into medical devices and potentially some form of aerospace industry, some parts of aerospace industry. So these are the clustering effect of Penang. A very strong
Clustering.
cluster, because companies need supplier.
Component makers.
They need component makers. They need all sort of suppliers, and industry can cluster around the ankles and develop organically. What we need in other places of the country, Johor, Malacca, I think will be to build the cluster organically. We cannot just think about having one big ankle without thinking through the cluster. It was possible in the last 20 years because since China joined WTO until Trump came in, there was a period of time where multinational in Malaysia sourced from China, because China was cheapest and easiest to source. But now geopolitically, it's difficult for these MNCs to purely source from China, and this is Malaysia's opportunity for reindustrialization.
How would you position Malaysia to receive this investment from China or the US?
I've been telling friends, and recently, finally, I make my point in Parliament. This point, if you follow my social media, we're posting it on my social media. Someone asked me, does Malaysia have a talent problem? So my reply is, there's no talent problem, there's only a pay problem.
The bosses here are not very happy to hear that.
But you see, think about this. I mean, bosses are also part of a nation. Bosses are also part of a nation, and we do not want to see a nation where every morning 50, 60,000 people on motorbike in my constituencies in Johor, queuing up to enter Singapore and to work at 2,000 Sing dollars. Okay? There are many Malaysians who are in Singapore, they are only working for jobs which are 2,000 Sing dollar, around 2,000 Sing dollar. Around 2,000 Sing dollar means with the conversion is probably about 7,000 plus. But you ask every one of them, how much are you prepared to come back? Most likely, especially after COVID, and if you talk to, women who have kids or parents who have kids, they will tell you, you pay me 2/3 of Singapore pay, I'll be back. Especially the low end, especially those who are earning 2,000, 2,500 Sing dollar. You ask them, say, how much are you prepared to come back? Of course, those who are earning 20,000 is difficult because if you are earning 20,000 Sing dollar, we may not be able to create the sort of jobs to match. But we think through our economy, if we can together, public and private sector, together have a political will and consensus that we need to pay Malaysians better by automation, by removing unskilled foreign labor from the equation, or making employing unskilled foreign labor more expensive. It doesn't necessarily have to be totally removal of unskilled foreign labor, but you make employing unskilled foreign labor on a more even basis. Once you do that, then wages go up, and once wages go up to a level where it is around 2/3 of Singapore pay, you will have the talent. Right? So where do we position ourselves? I think it's very important that Malaysia must see itself as an indispensable middle in South Asia. We have been, for the longest of time, we have been telling ourselves we're competing with Vietnam, we're competing with Indonesia. Right? If you hear the conversation, when you were younger, when you're younger than my age now, you would be thinking of Malaysia competing with South Korea, Malaysia competing with Taiwan. But over the last 10 years, we have lowered our ambition and we say, oh, we're competing with Vietnam, we're competing with Indonesia. We are worried that Indonesia will rise. We're worried that Vietnam will rise and overtake us. But in reality, this year is quite interesting. I think this year, partly because I'm in this position that I meet many people, but also because this is a transition, this is a major transition that is happening. This year, we received many visitors. One of the visits was with the German president. For 26 years, there had not been a visit by a German chancellor or a German president. The German president came to visit Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore. What does that mean? It really means that the world, because of China Plus One, the world is rediscovering Southeast Asia. And when they start rediscovering Southeast Asia, they realize that Singapore is the financial hub. And we have to admit that Singapore is sophisticated, very sophisticated technologically and also financially. And over the next 10 years, they will still have that edge over the next 10 years. There's no point to say that we'll overtake Singapore in the next 5 years in terms of being a financial hub. That is not realistic. But Singapore doesn't have space. So Malaysia has the space and almost similar profile of workers if you pay a rate that is acceptable. Because 1 million of Malaysians are working in Singapore in various jobs. Right? In some of the jobs that you need a skilled worker, if you can pay 4,000-5,000 ringgit in Malaysia, you get the sort of skilled workers who is considered a skilled worker in Singapore, and that itself is a qualification process. Right? So we will have to see that moving forward, we cannot price ourselves at the same level as Indonesia or Vietnam. Because we will not be able to beat Indonesia or Vietnam in terms of the sheer number of unskilled labor. We don't have demographic dividend, but we do have a strong environment. We do have a strong English language framework, common law system. We have our logistic is fantastic. So we do have a space, and that space is what I would call the indispensable middle in Southeast Asia. But are we competing with Singapore? Are we competing with Indonesia or Vietnam? I would say no, because the diversion is huge. Any of the country here in Southeast Asia, one country cannot eat everything.
Yeah.
Because of the diversion. Therefore, some form of vertical integration can happen. A company can set up their regional HQ in Singapore and set up their factories in Johor. It helps Johor, it helps Singapore. Because for a period of time during what we call the hyper-globalization period, Singapore doesn't need the hinterland. Because container boxes, you can move container boxes from Mexico to Thailand, Thailand to China. You move container boxes anywhere, anytime, and the catchphrase during that period is called just in time. Now the catchphrase is just in case.
Because of the geopolitical risk.
And also the disruption. Over the last few years, the world realizes that the world doesn't function just as you wish. Over the last 4 years or 5 years, the world realizes that there are pandemics and there may be future pandemics. Okay, there are future health crises. And we have an aging society which will also carry other health challenges. The world realizes that we have not abolished war yet. War happens, and war happens in mainland Europe. And we have geopolitical challenges in the Straits of Taiwan, in South China Sea, and this thing can flare up whatever way. So there could be disruption. The world realizes that financial system globally is not necessarily foolproof. There can be financial crisis. So we are realizing that there are disruption of different manner, and there's one disruption that we all have to deal with, and no one would want to pay for it, which is called climate change. Right. So all this basically shift the world from just in time to just in case, from the pursuance of economic efficiency, low cost economic efficiency, to people who are prepared to pay some premium for economic security. So this is the space where Malaysia can find itself, and if we come together and realize that we have to price ourselves slightly higher than Indonesia, slightly less than Singapore, that space will be a space for us to grow our economy and grow the income of ordinary Malaysians over the next decade or so. And interestingly, among gig workers, there was a survey that shows that 35% of gig workers are graduates.
35.
Okay? Graduates do not want to work in the formal structure, formal employment. And the Department of Statistics report in June, which shown the first quarter formal sector survey, shows that 80% of Malaysians who work in the formal sector receive a pay less than 5,500. Okay, 80% below 5,500. Medium wage is around 2,200. That means 50% of workers are earning less than 2,200. 2250.
Out of what? How many million you say?
This is about 9 million.
9 million workers.
Salarized workers. Yeah. That means those who receive a pay, those who are not self-employed, those who are not doing business, they receive a formal pay. 80% are earning less than 5,500, which calls into a lot of questions. For instance, when we say we build affordable housing, if affordable housing is 300,000 ringgit, 80% of the salarized Malaysian would not be able to afford. And when we think about retirement, okay, we are going to be an aging society. When you think about retirement, if you have a generation of workers who are earning very little, it will be a ticking time bomb for the society in 10, 15, 20 years. So those are the challenges that we will have to face. So when we start talking about paying people better, it's not just we are trying to trying to be populist. We are trying to think of a transformation of our industry so that we are more technological dependent than labor dependent. And we reduce our dependence on unskilled foreign labor. We move up the ladder, and we move our people up the ladder as well.
But the counter argument by most employers, including FMM, is look, no issue about increasing salary, but there also must be a increase in productivity.
Yeah. So my usual reply is like this. Okay, if you sweep the floor with a broom, you ask the guy, you must increase your productivity. So Chee will, instead of sweeping 8 hours, he'll sweep 15 hours.
Or more floors.
Yeah, or more floors. So that is our conception of increasing productivity. But in most other societies in the world, especially in more progressive societies and more advanced society, you give the guy a machine. Do you agree with me? You give the guy a machine, or at least a vacuum cleaner. Once you give the guy a machine, whatever mechanization, automation, or digitalization, or any adoption of technology, you would agree with me that once you think through, his productivity will increase tremendously, far more than we forcing him to work more hours or work harder. And I think that is a mindset shift we need. It is not about how many hours the guy stay in the office. It's what is the outcome. Right? What is the outcome? Output and what sort of impact. So we must come back to assess our understanding of productivity. Our understanding of productivity is not how much time the guy put in, but what sort of technologies we provide the guy. And you think through, societies progress through technologies. The United States became a very strong agriculture nation in the 19th century. The United States did not become a great agricultural country in 19th century without the technical college, without the canal. Right? These are infrastructure and technology and education center and research center. These are the ingredients of productivity. Likewise, the Japanese farmers are doing, Japanese fishermen are doing very well. The Vietnamese fishermen are increasingly doing well, and Korean fishermen are doing very well. What is in common is actually not so much of the fishermen being very hardworking. It is their shipping industry being very good. Japan and Korea particularly.
Technology again.
Yeah, technology again. The fishermen, it is not that the Japanese fishermen and Korean fishermen are particularly hardworking. It is because they have very good shipbuilding industry to empower them. So when it comes to productivity, I really hope we can change the way we see productivity and look at investing. When it comes to investing in productivity, it is not getting our guys to go to training, but not changing anything that we do. The moment we change technology, we change the way we do things, either you change the process or you change the infrastructure, you change the technology, you will have a whole new set of possibilities. Malaysia is producing solar panel for the world, and we have the highest exposure to the sun. Yet we are not using solar sufficiently.
We got solar panel on top.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we have got solar panel.
Wonderful. This is like the passion of new ideas in Melaka. So, yeah, so costly is true. Technology is always most expensive when least people adopt it. Once it becomes popular, once there is a policy framework, and once more people adopt it, prices will come down. I think that is the general rules. So that is the framework. But you asked me about subsidy. It is going to be the biggest challenge that this government will have to manage.
50 billion
yes.
a year.
Subsidy was not too much around 2018, 2019 when we fixed the palm price at 205, 2.05 ringgit in December 2018. At that point of time, the annual subsidy cost 50 fuel subsidy cost was around 6 to 7 billion ringgit, which at that time was deemed acceptable. And actually there was a period of time that same price was actually already above international price, especially during COVID. If you remember, there was a period of time where global oil price came down like nobody business. But because of the Ukraine war, and also because of the price difference of diesel in Malaysia and in our neighboring countries, we have now faced with a 50.8 billion subsidy bill in 2022. This year is likely to be around the price. We're now stuck. Do you want to increase petrol price, or do you want to stay with this? Sticking with this means that 15 to 17% of the budget is just to pay for fuel subsidy, not inclusive of other subsidies. The overall subsidy bill is about 70 plus billion. The total budget is only 380 billion. Out of 380 billion of federal budget, 50 billion gone to fuel subsidy. Particularly diesel. Diesel, I would think, I mean, this is my own theory lah. Actually, diesel is half of it. Almost 20 over billion diesel subsidy. We don't use so much diesel. It's really because in Chinese say, 赔钱的生意没人做，杀头的生意有人做。That means businesses that doesn't pay, no one will be interested in businesses that do not pay. But businesses that may kill you, that may chop off your head, but comes with lucrative profit, will still enter there. There are still plenty of people interested in. We have now become a nation of selling diesel, smuggling diesel. So I think very soon we will have to deal with diesel smuggling. But diesel smuggling cannot be done through just enforcement. You will have to narrow the gap. You have to narrow the price cap. The more price cap you narrow, the better it is, and the less smuggling will happen. And at some point, we will have to increase petrol price, but at the same time provide either cash handout or other form of subsidy, targeted subsidies to people who are affected.